Aisha had grown used to silence. It filled the walls of her marriage, sitting between her and Imran at the dinner table, in the car, in the bedroom where words were replaced with nods or the occasional reminder about bills, meetings, or relatives. She loved him once with a fullness that left no space for questions, but over the years, she felt herself shrinking into someone unnoticed. He worked long hours, came home tired, scrolled through his phone, and carried the weight of responsibilities with an intensity that left no room for her loneliness. She told herself this was marriage, predictable, steady, not necessarily warm. Yet sometimes, in the quiet of her own heart, she longed for a voice that asked how she was, not what she had cooked. Danish had been in their circle for years, first as Imran's colleague, then as his friend, now as a familiar presence who blended into family dinners and weekend plans. Where Imran's words were short, Danish's carried patience. He had a way of listening that disarmed her, of asking questions that did not sound rehearsed. She noticed details, how he remembered stories she mentioned months ago, how he smiled when she laughed at something silly, how his eyes softened when she spoke about her dreams from long ago. He never overstepped, never lingered in ways that could be called improper, but there was something in his attentiveness that highlighted what was missing at home. She told herself not to notice. She reminded herself that he was just Imran's friend. Yet the awareness grew each time their paths crossed. Aisha would catch herself preparing more carefully when she knew Danish might visit, or speaking more animatedly when he was around, a side of her that Imran rarely drew out anymore. It was harmless, she convinced herself. It was only natural to enjoy kindness where it appeared. The night that changed everything had no warning. A family trip had been planned, but arrangements shifted, relatives pulled out, and storms in the city forced last-minute decisions. Imran, called back to work urgently, left Aisha in Danish's company with the intention that he would join later. What was supposed to be a short wait turned into a longer one, and circumstances tightened until only one room was available at the small guest house they had found on the road. Aisha hesitated, her heart quickening at the suggestion, but Danish reassured her gently, 2 beds, just for the night, nothing to worry about. She agreed, more out of necessity than choice, but even as she placed her bag down, a strange awareness settled over her. The room was modest. The kind that left no space between silence and thought. The hum of rain outside the window filled the air, and the dim light threw long shadows on the walls. Aisha tried to distract herself by unpacking, arranging small things unnecessarily, but every movement felt magnified. She was acutely aware of Danish's presence, the sound of him moving across the room, the weight of his nearness though he said nothing suggestive. He sat casually, scrolling through his phone, and she wondered if he felt the same pull of tension that she did. She lay awake longer than she expected, restless under the weight of her own thoughts. Memories of her marriage played like a film in her mind, nights where she had rolled over to face Imran only to find him asleep, mornings where her words were answered with absent nods. She asked herself if she had failed him, or if he had failed her, or if marriage simply eroded passion into companionship that neither noticed until it was gone. And here she was, in the same room with another man, feeling things she had long buried. It was wrong, she told herself. But it was also undeniable. Danish broke the silence with light conversation. He asked if she was comfortable, if the rain bothered her, if she wanted to talk. His tone was casual, but his eyes held hers a second longer than usual. She nodded, grateful for words to fill the air. They spoke of trivial things at first, childhood memories, awkward school stories, places they wanted to travel. His laughter made her smile, and in that moment, she felt seen in a way she had not in years. She noticed his kindness, the way he leaned in slightly when she spoke, the sincerity that seemed to wrap around every word. The more she shared, the lighter she felt, and the heavier the guilt pressed in her chest. The hours passed, and with each passing one, the line between comfort and danger thinned. She tried to remind herself that Imran trusted them both, that this was innocent, that the walls of this room would hold only conversation and nothing more. Yet inside her, something stirred, an ache for connection, a need to be acknowledged, a longing that was no longer just harmless. She told herself she could control it, that it was only for tonight, that no harm would come as long as they kept their boundaries. But the truth she refused to admit was already clear. The boundaries had shifted the moment she realized she didn't want the night to end. White heavy checkmark, word count 770. Do you want me to continue with section 2, the crossing of the line, in the same style, and word count next? The rain did not stop, and neither did the silence that followed their laughter. Aisha felt the weight of her own heartbeat as she sat in the dim light, every sound amplified, every second stretched into something more than ordinary. She had told herself repeatedly that this was harmless, that conversations could not undo the vows she had taken, that Danish was only Imran's friend and nothing more. Yet the way her chest tightened when their words faded and their eyes met told her she was lying to herself. Danish shifted in his seat, not in a way that demanded anything, but enough for her to feel the space between them narrowing without movement. He asked softly if she was tired, and though she nodded, she didn't move toward rest. She lingered in the comfort of his attention, the warmth that filled her more deeply than any conversation with her husband had in months. She realized with dread that she wanted it to continue, wanted him to keep speaking, wanted to remain in this cocoon where she was not invisible. Her voice betrayed her when she asked if he ever felt lonely. The question slipped out before she could stop it, heavy with meaning. Danish looked at her for a long second before answering, his expression unreadable yet kind. He admitted that he did, that sometimes even in rooms full of people he felt unseen, that being single often meant carrying silence that no one else noticed. His words mirrored her unspoken pain, and in that instant, their loneliness entwined. What began as conversation shifted into confession. Aisha spoke quietly of nights when she felt like a ghost in her own home, of days when she wished Imran would look at her and see more than duty. Danish listened without interruption, his silence saying more than words could. When he finally responded, it was not with judgment but with understanding, telling her she deserved to be heard, to be valued, to be more than an afterthought. She tried to smile, but tears blurred her vision, not dramatic sobs but a quiet release of years of restraint. That he reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was light, fleeting, as though he was testing the line neither dared cross. She froze, not pulling away, not moving closer, trapped in the space where decisions lived. That brief contact burned into her, and the silence after it became unbearable. She turned her hand slightly, enough to let his fingers rest against hers. It was nothing, it was everything, and she knew in that moment that they were already falling into what could not be undone. The room held its breath as their connection deepened without words. A shared look became longer, a smile faded into something heavier, and before she could summon reason, she felt his hand tighten around hers. Her body leaned toward him, her heart pounding, her mind screaming warnings she no longer had strength to obey. The world outside ceased to matter, the rain, the storm, the obligations waiting for them beyond this night. All that remained was the charged space between two people who had spent too long suppressing what they needed most. The first touch beyond hands was unspoken permission, a movement born of longing rather than intention. Aisha felt her defenses collapse under the weight of years of neglect, each gesture feeding the hunger she had denied herself. She knew it was wrong, every nerve in her body told her so, but she also knew she had never felt so alive. The faceless closeness consumed her thoughts, stripped her of pretense, left her clinging to the sensation of being wanted. For Danish, restraint slipped like sand through his fingers. He had told himself countless times that she was untouchable, that Imran's trust was sacred, that friendship had limits. Yet here he was, unable to resist the pull of her vulnerability, her warmth, the way she looked at him as if he was the only one who truly saw her. He felt the guilt even as he gave in, the knowledge of betrayal sitting heavily on his chest, but the moment swallowed them both. It was not rushed, nor spoken of aloud. It unfolded quietly, the way forbidden things often do, layer by layer, with hesitation melting into certainty. Shadows moved across the walls, breaths quickened, and what should never have happened became reality. In the faceless silence of that room, they crossed the line that could never be redrawn. When it was over, they did not celebrate. There was no triumph, no victory, only the echo of what they had done pressing down on them. Aisha sat still, the weight of guilt already sinking into her, the knowledge that her marriage had been fractured beyond repair no matter how well she pretended otherwise. She touched her hand absent-mindedly, as if trying to erase the memory, but the imprint lingered. Danish looked away, his silence louder than any words. He did not apologize, did not justify, but his face carried the same torment she felt. They had wanted connection, but what they found was a bond tainted with betrayal. The silence that followed was heavier than any they had shared before, filled with the awareness that they had chosen desire over loyalty. Aisha closed her eyes, hoping the darkness would hide her shame, but she knew it would follow her long after the night ended. The line was crossed, and there was no going back. White heavy checkmark word count 770. Do you want me to move on and write section 3? aftermath, and consequences, in the same focused style. Morning arrived with a silence heavier than the storm outside. The air in the room was thick, as if it carried the memory of everything that had taken place. Aisha opened her eyes slowly, the reality of the night before flooding her chest like a weight she could not lift. She did not look at Danish immediately, afraid of what his expression might reveal, afraid of what her own would betray. She knew she should feel relief that the night was over, but instead she felt the crushing truth that nothing in her life would ever return to what it was before. Her first instinct was guilt. Every thought of Imran stabbed at her with sharp precision, his trust, his absence, his unawareness of what had happened. She imagined him calling to check on her, his voice calm and certain, never suspecting that in the very hours he was away, his friend and his wife had broken the bond he believed unshakable. Aisha tried to steady her breath, but each inhale reminded her of the betrayal written into her body, a story she could never erase. Danish moved quietly, the sound of his steps unsteady, as if he too carried the same burden. He did not speak at first, and she was grateful for the silence because she did not know how to form words. What could be said? That it was a mistake. That it meant nothing. Both would be lies. The act had been born from need, not accident, and its weight was too heavy to dismiss with convenient phrases. She knew if he spoke, his words might undo her further, so she remained still, her hands gripping the edge of her chair until her knuckles ached. When he finally did speak, his voice was low, stripped of the warmth it usually carried. He told her he wished he could take back the night, not because he didn't want her, but because it left them both bound to a secret neither of them could confess. Aisha closed her eyes at his words, her heart aching at the truth. What they shared could never be acknowledged, could never find daylight without burning everything around it. What had felt like salvation in the dark now felt like poison in the morning. They packed their things without looking at each other, every movement deliberate, careful, as though avoiding eye contact might undo the fragile control they clung to. She wanted to tell him something that could ease the weight, but no words came. He too kept his silence, speaking only when necessary, as if anything more would only deepen the wound. When Imran arrived later, smiling with the casual ease of someone who trusts completely, Aisha's chest tightened until she could hardly breathe. She hugged him, but it felt wrong, her arms trembling, her lips pressed into a smile that felt foreign. Danish stood nearby, speaking casually, hiding the truth behind a mask that Aisha envied. She envied his ability to slip into normalcy, even if only on the surface, while inside she felt herself fracturing. The days that followed were worse than the night itself. At home, every word Imran spoke felt sharper, every question felt loaded, even when it was not. Aisha could not separate the ordinary from the guilt that clouded her mind. She began avoiding his eyes, turning away too quickly, speaking less, afraid that her silence might confess more than words ever could. She told herself she could bury it, that if she never spoke of it, the night would fade, but her heart betrayed her. Each time she saw Danish at gatherings, the memory returned with unrelenting force. One glance was enough to remind her of the line they crossed, one shared silence enough to reopen the wound. Danish, for his part, grew distant. He spoke to her less, avoided lingering near her, avoided conversations that stretched beyond the necessary. She told herself it was for the best, that the distance was a form of protection, but it stung nonetheless. He had been her comfort once, the only person who made her feel seen, and now even he turned away, as if the memory was too dangerous to hold. She began to realize that the affair had not given her closeness, it had only deepened her isolation. At night, lying beside Imran, she replayed the choices that led her here. She wondered if he could sense the change in her, if her silence felt heavier to him, if her touch betrayed hesitation. He never questioned, never looked at her with suspicion, but his very trust was its own punishment. She carried his faith like a burden she could not bear, each day adding weight until she could hardly stand beneath it. She thought of confessing more than once, but each time the image of his face shattered her resolve. The cost would be too high, the damage irreversible. And yet, silence did not erase the truth, it only forced her to live with it. She carried the night like a secret scar, invisible but always present, reminding her that even a single moment could rewrite the course of an entire life. For Danish, the distance eventually became permanent. He stopped visiting as often, excused himself from gatherings, let their connection fade into something unspoken. Aisha felt the loss sharply, but she knew it was inevitable. They had reached for each other in a moment of weakness, but it was not love that bound them now, it was guilt, shame, and a memory neither could bear to face too long, and so life resumed on the surface, with dinners, conversations, routines, as though nothing had ever happened. Yet beneath it all, Aisha carried the knowledge that the night had not been erased. It lived in her silence, in the spaces between words, in the way her heart tightened every time she heard Danish's name. She had crossed a line, and there was no return. The truth would remain hidden, but the guilt would stay, shaping her quietly, endlessly, in ways Imran would never know. White heavy checkmark word count 770. Would you like me to now combine all three sections into one continuous full story, almost equals 2,280 words, for a smooth final draft? Weeks turned into months, but the night remained alive in Aisha's mind, resurfacing when she least expected it. She would be cooking and suddenly remember the way her hand lingered in his, or lying in bed and feel the ghost of his presence beside her. No matter how much time passed, the memory was not dulled, it sharpened in silence, refusing to fade. She had told herself it would become easier, that if she stayed quiet, life would return to normal, but instead the opposite happened. The guilt aged her faster, carving lines of exhaustion into her face, softening her laughter, dimming her spirit in ways no one seemed to notice except herself. Imran carried on as always, steady and predictable, his trust unwavering. That very trust became unbearable for her. She could not meet his eyes without feeling a crack in her chest, could not hear his gentle words without remembering how she had betrayed them. Every time he thanked her for something small, every time he praised her in front of family, she wanted to collapse under the weight of deception. Yet she smiled, played the role, and lived with the secret like a shadow that never left her side. Danish remained absent more than present. He excused himself from gatherings, declined invitations, and when he did appear, he kept his distance. Aisha knew it was deliberate, a way of protecting them both, but his absence cut deeper than she admitted. She had not realized how much she had leaned on his presence until it was gone. Now, when she looked across the room and found the empty space where he used to sit, she felt both relief and a sharp sting of loss. The irony was cruel. She had betrayed her husband for a connection that now no longer existed. She tried to busy herself with routines, burying guilt beneath chores and obligations, but it seeped through everything. Even in conversations with friends, she found herself distracted, responding with half smiles while her mind wandered back to the secret. She began avoiding mirrors, unable to hold her own gaze, as though her reflection accused her in ways no one else could. She prayed quietly at night, asking for forgiveness, but even prayers felt hollow when she knew she would never confess. Silence was her punishment, and she bore it with no end in sight. One afternoon, she saw Imran speaking on the phone with Danish, their voices warm, their friendship unchanged. The sound of his laughter, free of suspicion, pierced her heart. She realized then that it was not only her marriage she had betrayed but also the bond between two men who trusted each other completely. She imagined Imran's face if he ever learned the truth, the shock, the disbelief, the destruction. The image haunted her so deeply that it kept her awake for nights, staring at the ceiling, replaying every choice that had led her here. The passage of time did not heal, it only deepened the distance within her. She and Imran still shared a life, but intimacy had become impossible. Every touch felt dishonest, every kiss stained with memory. She found herself pulling away subtly, blaming tiredness, headaches, or distractions. Imran, unaware, accepted her excuses, but his patience only magnified her guilt. She wondered if he sensed something but chose not to question, or if he truly had no idea at all. Both possibilities unsettled her. Danish, too, was not untouched. When they occasionally crossed paths, his eyes betrayed what his silence concealed. He looked older, more burdened, carrying the same secret in his posture. Their exchanges were brief, polite, stripped of warmth, but beneath them lay an unspoken acknowledgement of the night that changed everything. Neither dared to speak of it, yet neither could forget. Their avoidance became its own confession, proof that what happened could never be undone. As seasons shifted, Aisha realized that the betrayal had not only broken her marriage in ways unseen but had also broken her own sense of self. She no longer recognized the woman she had become. She had once been steady, certain, believing in her own morality. Now she was fractured, hiding, carrying a truth that kept her locked in silence. The memory of Danish's touch was not a comfort anymore, it was a chain that bound her to guilt. She sometimes wondered if he regretted it as much as she did, or if, in secret moments, he too remembered it with longing. The not knowing was its own torture. She thought often about what might have been if she had resisted, if she had kept her distance, if she had walked through that night with discipline instead of surrender. She imagined a life where she looked at her husband without shame, where she spoke to Danish without heaviness, where her heart was free of this secret. But that life had been lost in a single night, and no amount of wishing could restore it. The danger they crossed was not just the act itself, it was the permanence of it. Infidelity was not a mistake that could be undone, it was a scar that marked every future moment. Aisha understood that now. She would carry the weight forever, even if no one else ever knew. The room they once shared existed only in memory, but it had rewritten the course of all their lives. She smiled when required, laughed when expected, played her role flawlessly, but inside she knew the truth. The night had changed her, and though she would never confess, she could never escape it. It was the dangerous line they crossed together, and its shadow would remain long after everything else faded. White heavy checkmark word count 770. Do you want me to also create a title plus description for the completed 4-section story, like we did before?